All right, so thank you for coming. This is my friend Mike McDonald. I've known Mike
For just about 21 years, because we had just started.
He and I beat him by a few months at John Hancock in the customer service field.
Yep.
And we've been friends ever since. And he's has a wealth of information. He's done very, very well for himself at John Hancock. He won awards, I believe. Yeah.
I have, yeah, a couple.
For
Yeah.
sales. I mean, he's done very, very well, and I'm appreciative for him to come here tonight and tell you about his journey, about, I'll tell you what he wants to talk about. But please listen, and thank you very much. So a warm applause.
Thank you very much, and thank you, John, and thank all of you for taking time to visit with me today. And it's an honor for me. I think I've had a fair amount of professional success, but one thing I've not had the opportunity to do is speak in a setting like this. So it's the fact that you've taken time out of your schedules, out of your day. It's an honor for me. So thank you. I'll start with that. As John said, we've known each other for 21 years. I have been in the financial services industry for 21 years. As John had mentioned, I started at John Hancock in a customer service capacity, and it's been an interesting journey from that point. My understanding, when John asked me to come in, I wanted to find out a little bit more about your backgrounds, what would be helpful to you, and I really tried to put together a presentation that I thought would be beneficial for people looking to enter into corporate America and then be successful in corporate America, and incorporating some of what I've learned over the years from a very practical standpoint, both as a former hiring manager and now as a senior sales associate for the past 10 years in the institutional investments marketplace. That being said, as we go through the presentation, this is not a huge group. Questions come up, please interrupt me. Let me know. We'll have a time for questions at the end, but also throughout, because I could be, hopefully I can relay some information that maybe I wasn't planning to as well, if that's helpful. So, let's just page down, John. Okay, thank you. So, again, the agenda today, I thought I'd share a little bit about my background, so you know who I am and where I'm coming from, and then really share very practical advice. I would be very surprised if I say anything today that any of you find to be incredibly enlightening. It's the advice I'm going to give you is what I've seen people make mistakes on and fail to do and seen it hurt their career growth, or I've seen people execute on very basic things and seen that enhance their career growth dramatically throughout the years. So really some practical advice both for interviewing and then also once you enter into the role that you assume. And then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So my background, although I've been in financial services for over 20 years, my background was I did not study finance in college. I was a history major with a government minor. I'd interned on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. in the mid-90s. Enjoyed that quite a bit. And then post-graduation worked on some political campaigns and found my way to the point where I was getting married and I needed money. So I took a more traditional job with John Hancock, the customer service line, and really became much more educated in the financial services end of things, and that progressed throughout my career. During that time, I've had 7 years as a hiring manager, which is a fascinating thing because up until that point, I'd sat in a lot of interviews where you all are. And you get experience from being the one interviewed. But one of the best pieces of experience I had was interviewing other people. Because it really changes your perception as to the thought process and really forces you to think more about what the hiring manager is looking for. Because I had some people that were, arguably well prepared, but they were clearly not focusing on what was important to the hiring manager. And that can make a big difference. So that's something we'll touch on as well. And then I've spent the past 10 years as a institutional sales professional within financial services. What that means is if you were to go to a financial advisor say at Merrill Lynch or Ameriprise Financial or UBS, Deutsche Bank, the advisor would sit down with you and likely either allocate your dollars towards a pre-run model portfolio or maybe select from a list of recommended investments. The folks at those firms, at the Deutsche Banks, Ameriprise, Merrill Lynch, et cetera, they're our clients, or they're my clients. And effectively, I am working with them to get them comfortable with, to understand what we do at John Hancock from an investment standpoint, and hopefully have them recommend our investments that would then be carried through. So, but the principles that I'm going to talk to you about today, relationship building, and really being selfless in your relationships, have helped me be successful in a sales role and a professional role, and I think is very applicable as you step into the marketplace. And yes, I wanted to put this in. Most important role overall. Very pleased to say I'm a husband now for 21 years and a father for the past 14. My son Harry, daughter Grace, my wife Laurie, and I never miss a chance because this little one's a cutie. That's Rosie, so that's the other thing too, just sort of balancing the professional and the personal life. So when I was speaking with John, he mentioned that a lot of you are starting to go on interviews. And again, a lot of this is pulled from my experience as a hiring manager. And really wanted to kind of touch upon, I'm sure there are numerous resources at Northeastern around resume writing and resume development. So I'm not going to get into that too much. But really keep in mind that the resume is designed to help get you in the door. At that point, I don't want to say it becomes irrelevant because it doesn't, but it's really put to the side. That's going to get you in the door with the hiring manager, whether that's, typically you're going to have someone screening out resumes who's going to be in an HR related role, and those individuals are looking for certain things, which I'm sure, Northeastern, I'm sure, is giving you a lot of good guidance on that, along with the hiring manager. They might say, I want this experience, this type of a background, these interests. Once you're in front of them, the resume goes to the side, and it really becomes their perceptions of you and really how you can help them be successful in their business. Some basic things I've seen people make mistakes on, and I've seen it in both directions. Obviously you want to dress appropriately for the role. Standard piece of advice is to dress for the one level above the job that you're interviewing for. I think that's good advice. You certainly want to look professional. Very, as I'm sure you all would. The cautionary tale here is don't go to the other extreme. I've seen people interview for jobs where they look like they're walking in wanting to be the CEO. And that can be great, but it can also work against you. So you want to look nice, neat, professional, and if you have any background on the culture of the company, it's kind of nice to incorporate that as well. The biggest mistake I saw people make was not coming prepared with company knowledge, which is just a crime in this day and age because it's so easy to get it, right? I mean, it's out there. The internet's there. It's very easy to spend literally sometimes 5 minutes, but you want to spend more than that, learning about the company. And you want to find out more about, yes, you want to know about their main business and what they're doing, but any new initiatives at the company, any new aspects of the company. Some of the best questions that you can ask an interviewer are, I was reading up and I saw that you all are entering into this new line of business. Does that impact your team? Will this role be involved in that? Because I'm very excited about X. Even if that interviewer has absolutely nothing to do with that, it shows them a couple things. One thing, it shows that you're serious, you're interested in what they're doing, you're well prepared, and really shows them that you're willing to go that extra step. So that immediately will take you from a grouping here and put you up to a higher grouping. It's a little thing. I preach the same thing. I work with a lot of junior salespeople at John Hancock, and I preach the same thing. Because if I'm going in to see a new client and I don't do that, that keeps me at this level. If I'm able to come in and talk about a few initiatives that are going on at their firm, things that might be important to that potential client, again, I get elevated up here. And it's easy to do. And like I said, it's, you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't do that. Same thing. You know, it really is about how you can help the hiring manager. And this is something nobody told me when I was interviewing. If you can get a sense for what they're looking for in an applicant and really give them the impression that it's not about you simply finding the best job, but it's your ability to help them be successful. And that could be, you know, certainly your background, your knowledge base, but your willingness to work hard, your willingness to go above and beyond. These are the things that will separate you out. And, you know, I think it's very natural as people to be thinking about ourselves, not from a selfish standpoint, but even just from a, maybe even from a self-conscious standpoint, but to really step out of that and think, okay, if I'm in this role, if I was hiring me, what would I want to hear? You know, and what would I want them, what would I want this, with that thought process, what would I want this hiring manager to know about me that's going to really help them grow and be successful? Because ultimately, when you're hiring someone, it's the most important decision you'll make as a manager. If you hire the right people, which is an art, believe me, the rest of your job is so much easier as a manager. You know, if you gave me the choice to hire, you know, one of the smartest people who maybe doesn't have a great attitude, or somebody who has a great attitude who's willing to learn and understand the business, I would take the second every time. It's hard to weed that out, but you want to make sure you're communicating both your knowledge, your expertise, but also your willingness to make things work. Again, ask thoughtful questions. This is something, and you know, I've seen this happen, and my guess is that you're all very dedicated students. You're hardworking. Don't overdo it, and really don't broach any sort of personal research. I've actually had this happen in interviews where people knew some things about me personally. They weren't bad things, but it was kind of, quite honestly, it was kind of creepy. And I know when I was hiring, I'd hire along with a couple other managers, and it came up like, hey, they knew that, you know, knew this about me, kind of like where I lived, stuff like that. And it's like, no, you know, keep the research to the business side. You know, maybe a reference to a university, something like that. But really, there's danger there. So just be aware of that, because I've seen people go the other direction, and it's not going to help you get the job. I'll tell you that. You know, most important thing, be genuine and be honest in your interviews. You know, and I joke that I've made a successful career as a salesperson, relationship manager by not knowing things. You're not expected to know everything. If you don't know something, it's okay to say that, you know, to be honest. Again, I've seen people, I had one candidate come in, and I had a client, this is many years ago, this is probably 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and I had a client that, and I forget the gentleman's name, but he worked at this particular firm. And the candidate referenced that he knew this firm, and we were talking about, I said, oh, do you know so-and-so? And he said, oh, yes, I've met her, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. It was a guy, or vice versa. And regardless of how good that interview was, he just went out the door. Because, and he was a good candidate. And I wasn't hiring the position, but I told my boss at the time, I said, here's the deal. And actually, I think it was a woman, and he referenced it as a male. And I told him, and he just went right off the list. Because at the end of the day, do I expect him to know every person at every firm? No, of course not. Do I expect the person I'm hiring to know every detail about a project or a particular topic? No. But I want that person to be honest with me, because that's the person I want to build my success around. And like I said, as a salesperson, I see it all the time. People will make things up or kind of flub an answer, and it's just, people know that, and people ultimately respect you for being honest and, you know, and dealing in a straightforward nature. Follow-up is critical. You know, and I would say, again, put yourself in the place of the hiring manager and the HR manager or the HR person that you're dealing with on interviews. It's very appropriate, and John, please tell me if you disagree with any of this, but to follow up or to ask an HR person during an interview process when they would expect you could expect to hear back. What I would typically do is if they say a week or 2 weeks, if it's a week, I think it's very appropriate 2 weeks later to follow up, to check in. The other thing, I still think the basics go a long way. Whether it's a thank you note to the people you meet with, I think is still the best way to go. A handwritten thank you note. An email, I think, is also acceptable. What I would say is, and I've seen this too, again, err on the side of being professional. Because again, and I've seen it in different degrees. So I think for an internal candidate, I would say an email is fine. So if you're at a firm and you're interviewing for a position within the company, I think an internal would be fine. External, I would recommend a handwritten note. But I've seen it in both cases. One, where this candidate, solid interview, was being considered for the role, and this individual sent an email to my colleague as a thank you, and it had like a flashing icon in it. And it was, if I remember correctly, it was pink in nature. It was pink. And the woman that I worked with, you know, she just lost her mind. She was like, no, we're not hiring this person. Absolutely not. So she went out the window. What I've seen more from a subtle standpoint, I had an internal interview, and this individual has since gone on to work with me and then be promoted to a role very similar to me, and he's done a fantastic job. But the thank you email he sent me had some grammatical mistakes. And I just said, okay, so this is an important email for that individual, right? He wants the job, he wants the opportunity. This person, as part of their role, is going to be communicating with my clients. I can't have that. So I, kind of pushed that individual off. About 2 years later, he came to me afterwards. I gave him some very frank feedback on that and some other items. Did everything I said. 2 years later, he was working with me. 5 or 6 years later, he was promoted into his own role. So just, again, keep that in mind. Everything, all your interactions are going to be judged in the light of how is this person going to represent, GE, or more importantly, how are they going to represent me as a manager at GE? So just keep that in mind. So you've gotten the role, you're in a position, you're excited about it, you want to do well, you want to climb that ladder, you want more responsibility. Again, using very practical experience, the absolute best thing you can do to promote your careers is this item right here. Doing your day-to-day job well, with enthusiasm, with excitement. It is the best interview for promotion within the company. Absolutely the best. And I've seen people miss on that, particularly with the second item. So this is many years ago, and I remember, I was in a role where, sort of a junior sales role, and as part of the role, we would occasionally be asked to come and would have clients come in on a Sunday evening for meetings the following Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And we'd be asked, hey, Mike, can you come in on Sunday evening for a welcome dinner with our clients? Nice people, have dinner with them, make them feel welcome, go home. That's it, right? Myself, other colleagues, certainly embraced that, did that. It wasn't particularly hard, it was nice. I remember one individual, very talented gentleman, smart gentleman, worked hard during the day, would never do that. There weren't extenuating circumstances. He wasn't married at the time, didn't have kids. He just didn't want to come in on the Sunday. That's fine. It wasn't required of the job. So, he wasn't fired or anything. He was just, is what it is. A senior position or a great opportunity from a client relationship perspective came open. Of course, he applied. He never got a serious look. Yeah, he was an internal candidate, so they interviewed him. Never even got looked at. And he was upset. And the thought process was, well, okay, we've asked you just to do something very simple, come in, have dinner with nice people, and you never did it. Now you want a job where your job is going to be building client relationships, going to dinners, things like that. You just don't get that shot. You know, and that's something where, you know, sometimes too we need to put our egos in check. I work with a junior person now who's unbelievably good. He's fantastic. And when he started with me 2 years ago, I said, I want you to understand this job is very unique because you're going to do some very high-end client-focused meetings with asset managers that in some cases run $200 million. Top clients. You're going to cover those meetings for me when I'm not there. That's going to be your job on one day. The next day I'm going to ask you to FedEx a bunch of items for me. And it's really, you know, and I need equal commitment to both. And he's gone above and beyond. He's phenomenal. He's asking me, is there anything else he needs to do? So what do I do as a senior person at the firm? Every time he gets a compliment from a client, every time he does something that I think is fantastic, what do I do with it? I send it to the individual who runs our group. A position hasn't come open, but the person that runs our group has sat down with him and basically said, you know, hey, Mike thinks highly of you, other people think highly of you. You are our guy when the position comes open. It may not be for 6 months, it may not be for a year, it might be tomorrow. But you're our guy. Now, will there be other people that interview for that? Yes. Will there be internal candidates that are qualified and talented? Yes. Will they get the job? No. Because this person he's done the high-end things well, which is obviously critically important. He needs to be able to do that. But he will do the other things that just need to get done in business. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. But ultimately, as a manager, as a senior sales professional, you know that separates success from failure. You know, very simple things. Do what you'll say you'll do. And I pulled that more from a sales presentation. You would not believe the amount of people from a client relationship standpoint who don't do what they tell their clients they're going to do. And it's not hard. I joke that my job is a series of incredibly simple things done on time and well over years to build relationships. But if you tell your boss you're going to do something, if you tell a client you're going to do something, just do it. This is something I would really stress. It's just something I put in together, the order of importance. And it's in corporate America, it's in life. In corporate America specifically, most important requirement is to your clients, depending on the role you're in. But if you do well by your clients, you will do well. Because that at some level will filter back to your boss, to the people that are very in positions of power. And again, what do they care about? They want, well, I'll use your GE where you interviewed, they want GE to look good. They want themselves to look good. If they know their people are getting good feedback from clients, it's huge. Your next area of support, your superiors and your colleagues. You know, one of my favorite, and there's going to be a couple quotes I have from Dale Carnegie, and I would recommend that if you've not read a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, best $6 or $7 you'll ever spend in your life. Always be thinking, how can I help my colleagues out? How can I help my boss out? And don't do it with the thought process that if I do this, I'm going to get X. But just do it. You know, I do a lot of things for my clients that have no direct benefit to me. None. And I don't do it with an expectation that I'm going to get something. But ultimately, at some point, it comes back. And it may come back where I'm a finalist in a search between two options. And 2 years ago, I helped out someone with an introduction somewhere. Or I put them in touch with someone who could help them with an analytical issue they were having. People remember that. And if it's a toss-up, they're going to go with me. It comes back to you in numerous ways. And your colleagues are incredibly important. If you're the person who's willing to help out colleagues, it gets back. People don't like to promote people who aren't liked by their colleagues. I'm not saying you have to sort of be a maybe not the most appropriate word, but kind of a kiss up. But if you're someone who's professional, who's willing to help colleagues, help them do what they need to do, it's a tremendous, tremendous benefit. And then lastly, yourself. You're last in that equation, but I guarantee you, if you take that approach, the benefits that'll come back to you will be tenfold. To give you a practical example, a lot of that comes from the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is an awful title, but a wonderful book, because it sounds very self-serving, but it's actually the opposite. Within reading that book and changing some things I did professionally, within less than a year, my income went up by 70%. And, I've had good career success since then, too. But it was pretty dramatic. I guess if you want to hit the next slide, John. Some other things, more from a traditional standpoint, longer-term career success, learn. I think you're all very ambitious. You're at a great university. Continue to pursue additional learning opportunities. You may have seen, I mentioned I didn't come from from finance background. I had no finance background. When I graduated, I couldn't have articulately told you what a stock or a bond was. My time in the industry, though, was marked by opportunities presented from exams that I had to take. Those were mandatory. We both took those and worried about them at the time. But then also there were exams and courses that I could take that weren't required. And again, you get a pool of people, X amount of people will never even approach it, X amount will out of this group. Some people will succeed, some people won't, some people will give up. The people that pursue, again, get put into a different category. So I've been able to pass a few designations that I wasn't required to take or pass, but again, it put me in a different spot for opportunity and also perception by my colleagues. Seeking networking opportunities, I think it's great, if you to join organizations in the industry, get to meet people in your industry, and again, use those same principles of selfishly helping those individuals. And again, that'll come back from a network standpoint. The other thing that I've learned a lot over the years is using your network as a value add, where maybe where I know you for years, say, for example, and I know you're in need of a person who has a certain skill set, and we've met at a different event. Well, I introduce you, and maybe you hire, maybe you don't, but again, I become a person of value, and as I'm helping you out. So just keep that in mind from a network standpoint. Something I wish somebody had told me, and I've done this, seek out a mentor, or maybe more than one mentor. Look, as you're in an organization or as you're in your chosen field, the people that you respect, people you say, I really respect the way that person works and the way they do their business. I'd like to learn more from them. And you can ask them, hey, I'd love to, would you be open to me using you as a mentor? Asking you questions as my career develops. I will tell you, as an individual, that's incredibly flattering. They're going to say yes. They're going to appreciate you for asking. And it's hugely important because there are going to be points in your career where you get questions or there are situations you're not going to really know how to proceed. And having that person in that role is going to be incredibly important. And don't necessarily make it one person. If there's several people, maybe there's someone who you value from a certain skill set, you could have multiple mentors. I won't belabor this anymore, but again, long-term success still very much tied towards these things. Again, be selfless in your generosity, be passionate in your daily job, build that network, and really, remember that the most important people from a business perspective are, it's not yourself. The other thing I would add, and I should put in there, it goes back to the slide too, and at times I need to work on this because I am, pretty professionally driven. The other group that is incredibly important and needs to remain front and center, that you need to be selfless with and dedicated to is your family and friends. So that's the other thing. I think that might be it. Oh, some timeless words of advice. Again, if you haven't read How to Win Friends and Influence People, like I said, awful title, makes it seem like you're being selfish, really teaches you just the opposite. couple quotes. We'll do 2 and 3. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. People want to talk about themselves. They want to know, they're very interested in themselves. We're human beings. Yes?
What was the book name that you said?
It's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's by Dale Carnegie. And I would suggest getting the paperback version, and reading the introduction, because the introduction gives you some good tips on how to make notes in the book and go back and refer it. It's one of the. I'm not one to read books multiple times. I've read it many times. And lastly, and this is something we haven't talked about, so I think it's important. It says a successful man. That's because the book was written many, many years ago. The successful person will profit from his mistakes and try again in a different way. If someone hasn't told you this yet, you will all fail at some point in your career. You will make mistakes. You will do things wrong. It's that point forward that determines success. What you do from it. Do you learn from that mistake? Do you take advice from your boss or from your colleagues? Do you not repeat it and you become better because of it? It's just the way it is. And again, being a person who has that type of a attitude will make you far more successful. So I mentioned that as someone who has made many mistakes and done many things wrong and pursued or persevered and done okay. So that's my list of practical items. I hope you found it helpful. And like I said at the beginning, happy to answer any questions about my job, questions you guys have about, believe me, I'm not going to know. Is everyone engineering students?
Everyone's engineering.
I am going to know nothing about math or engineering that you guys wouldn't know. You're going to be able to teach me a lot. But any questions at all, happy to take them. And if not, that's okay too.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You're on the phones way back when.
Yes. Yeah.
Your office, you're doing outbound calls, correct?
Yep.
No face-to-face.
Correct.
What do they wear in the office? Do they wear a shirt and tie?
So that's a great question. And here's where it comes down to sort of being professional, but also understanding the culture of the company. I've worn different things in that role, to answer your question. And it's kind of been dictated by the guidelines of the company, where at points in history we were more casual dress, and more recently, when I go in the office now, we work for John Hancock Investments. We're acquired by a Canadian company, Manulife Financial. Pretty formal in dress and attire. It was suit and tie except for Fridays. In either case, though, you want to dress professionally. And when I say that is, if jeans are the customary, if that's what people wear, including your boss, you don't want to show up in a suit and tie. But you want to show up in nice jeans with a tucked in shirt. Maybe people wear a blazer. Things like that. So again, one of the most difficult things I had as a manager was when I had female employees, when we were casual dressing less than appropriately. And maybe, even like in a slightly suggestive way. Fortunately, I had a very good colleague, and she was always willing to kind of pull them aside and have that conversation. But again, you're in an interview. Every day at work is an interview. So try to keep that in mind. So to answer your question, you want to be in line with the culture. You always want to be professional.
What about phone interviews? I tell my students to dress up to make you feel more important.
Well, since you're teaching the class, I'm not going to disagree. But no, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that advice. And a lot of people in my field work from a home office. I've transitioned to a home office, and I know many people are not successful unless they get up in the morning, get dressed for work in some sort of work attire, go in their office, close the door, and work. And I think that's the majority of people. I think that's very good advice. It's very good advice because it's going to give you that sense of professionalism that, especially for a job interview. I think it makes total sense for a job interview. It really does. I would be lying to you that if I didn't tell you I've been doing this a long time. I have 2 outfits, one you're looking at, the other is usually shorts and a t-shirt from my house. But it's a very good point. And it's something, that interview is incredibly important. And even if you're going to be 3% better, it's worth doing. So I would agree. I would agree.
Any questions?
Yes.
So I gave 2 interviews with MBTA, and during the first interview, I was kind of prepared, as you talked about reading about the company, and
Yep.
that's what I did. I did my homework. I talked about the company, but so I asked a lot of questions about their data blog. I was interviewing for an analyst position, data analyst
Okay.
position. So I read up the data blog, talked about it. So the manager of data analytics, who was taking my interview later, gave me a review about how I did, and she's like, "We were very impressed and you were very prepared about it, but you aren't very specific about what you want and how you can offer what we want." So my question basically is, how descriptive should we be about? So once you read up about the company, you kind of have a lot of questions.
Yep.
So how descriptive should we be during the interview about what we've read? Like,
Yeah.
what's the general criteria? Should we be asking a lot of questions? Should we be mentioning it a lot? Like, after I mentioned it twice, she was like, "Did you read our data blog?" So,
But and that was a second interview?
no, this was the first interview. Then after she gave me the feedback, the second interview, I was talking about how I could contribute
Yep.
to what they want.
Yep.
So yeah, that was a constructive feedback for which I'm like really thankful to her. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think I made the mistake during the first interview.
I wouldn't say it was a mistake. You got the second interview.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if it was a big mistake, you wouldn't have gotten the second interview. And I think you clearly put yourself in an elite group. As to, I think there's always that, she gave you the entree to ask more questions that you'd like to, more in regards to your personal goals. That's an entree to do that. And that's okay. I think at that point, you start to engage in that conversation. You could ask about, career growth opportunities long term. I think what's always important in that is that you reference it in a long-term capacity. Another tough thing as a hiring manager is the person who comes in, is good at their job, and 6 months later wants to do a different job. So I would say that, I don't think it was a mistake. You got the second interview. That was phenomenal. And when you have that entree, I think being prepared to say, hey, this is a long-term interest of mine. Are these opportunities that would be present at the company? Things along those lines. Yeah.
Thank you.
Trust me. Yeah. If it was a mistake, they just wouldn't have called you back. So.
Nothing else?
Any other questions? Okay, this was easy.
In a resume, what are the important points? Like you get so many resumes, obviously. So how do you shortlist? Like, what are the important points?
So I would say, and again, keep in mind, I don't have an engineering background, so I'm not going to know any of the technical points. My advice would be 1 page. I think bullet points are effective, and really, and I do think it's okay to kind of blend in some personal interests at the end, things like that, to share a little bit about your personality. If there are technical requirements for the job, I would customize the resume. So, that is important too. Or if there are, I think sometimes people don't customize their header depending on the job they're interviewing for. It's very important to do that. I don't know, again, sort of from a technical standpoint, I really wouldn't be able to guide you at all on that.
But when you're,
Yeah.
I think what she's trying to get at is, when you're looking, you have a job description,
Yep.
you bring, is there something
That I look for?
Do you look for, particularly, do you look at the summary, is it the
Yeah.
skills, is it just the way it's presented? What do you personally look for?
So, something I look for, especially if I'm hiring for roles entering into the marketplace or first jobs, I look for a background that's going to reference some, what I would call some less than glamorous roles. If you worked during your time here and what you did, and having that on there. I think a lot of people discount that because That's probably not a job that's relevant to what you're looking to do. It's not relevant to what you studied in school, so people downgrade that. But I love that, especially in the, when I was hiring more entry-level spots to a company, because I also saw a big separation between people who had what I would call lousy jobs and understood what that was and understood that the benefits of being in a professional setting. So, that's something I look for that's a little bit unusual. I think also people who are self-starters is very, very interesting. So if you have particular interests that you've pursued in relation to the field, it's very interesting. I've always seen that where one of the pieces of advice for people looking to get into my business is there's one license you can acquire in financial services. And I wouldn't recommend this to any of you, but just more from an example standpoint, that you can acquire when you're not actually employed by a financial services firm. People who pursue that on their own and get it, it just, again, jumps out because this is a person who pursued extra education, pursued a license, and didn't have to do that. So anything that you've done like that is very important. Anything that also shows ability to be committed over the long term and meet a successful goal. So personal achievements, one that's coming to mind, like people who are Eagle Scouts, for example, within the Boy Scouts of America. It's a long process, takes a lot of commitment over a number of years. Things like that can be differentiators too.
Let me ask you guys a question. If you don't mind.
Yeah, no, please.
Once you get your degree, has your education stopped? Are you done? It's okay if you say yes. You can kind of continue the education.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
When Mike and I started John Hancock, we were required to take your Series 6 and 63.
Yep.
If you were there for a year, they gave you a bonus for you could take your Series 7. Everyone that was there for a year, as soon as you get the year mark, you've got your Series 7, which was like the big thing in the financial world. And then Mike and I split for different ways. I got my Certified Employee Benefit Specialist, CEBS, designation, which is a series of 8 or 10 exams, because I was in that field. I got my PMP because I was in that field, so we always continue to grow. I passed my CFA level 1, failed level 2.
That's a bear. I've yet to approach the CFA, so
How do you know?
give you credit for that.
But you have at least 2 designations under your
I do,
and
yeah.
It's not one exam. You guys get, some of you come to my office and say, I got this certificate. I'm like, in what? Like, in doing Excel. That's not a certificate. That's like a certificate of completion. We're talking certifications. Mike here has at least 2 certifications. Never mind all the other FINRA exams that you passed.
Yeah.
I have 2 designations and a plethora of other things I passed. But don't confuse a certificate with a certification. I can give you a certificate from coming to my class today. Don't put it on a resume.
Yeah.
If I give you a certification,
That's a
that
great
goes
point.
a lot longer. So
Yeah.
don't forget to continue
And
learn.
yeah, it's great. And you made me think of something I haven't thought of in years. When I went from the role that we started in together, I was interviewing for an inside sales position. And I'd done pretty well in the interview. And I think I know I was on the fence for them. And I was going to be sitting for my Series 7, the designation, the certification John was just talking about. Literally, I passed it, let them know I passed it. The next week, I got an offer. So, it does. That was one where it's a direct correlation to getting the job.
So and as Mike was saying, it's going to have an effect.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't want to get other exams or designations, I'm not sure what they are in engineering, per se, but if you don't continue to grow, even in the industry that your company might have different things to go, they're going to choose somebody else that has, and they'll
And to be honest, it can be an enjoyable process. When I moved into this role, I was actually right before it, I was pursuing what's called my CIMA. It's a Certified Investment Management Analyst. It was a 2-level program. It's now 3 levels. The culmination is a 4-hour exam at Wharton. So it's pretty legit. I took that in part just to have credibility with the people I was sitting down with. But one, I enjoyed it a lot. Two, I learned a lot about an industry that I'd been in for, at the time, 10 years. I learned a lot of things that were just very intriguing and made my conversations with those clients better. So, yeah.
I also embrace additional responsibility. If your manager comes up and says, can you do this? I need a volunteer. Volunteer.
Yeah.
You know, go into the workplace each day, smile, say hello, how was your day? Usually it's fine. We don't get too detailed here in the United States, too personal. But ask, can I help you out with anything? Because then you start being the person that you're nice and can want to go to. And if they give you something, take it and run with it. You know, do your job well. I mean, last year I started here back in January of 2017. You know, I was the only one basically on the team because people could work from home. I never worked from home. I was in Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to whatever. I was consistent. And what they do, they rewarded me for helping do 4 CPT forms. If somebody transitioned, they need a spot, they came to me.
Yeah.
It was a thankless task, but I did it, but I got respect.
Yeah.
It helped me out in my career, it helped me out, you know, I got other responsibilities. I stuffed envelopes. I met with clients, you know, you talk about that. I mean, you know, I stay up and some of the best times in your career could be a menial task like stuffing envelopes. Because you'll all be working together, like 4 or 5 of you, stuffing an envelope. Or one of the best times would be you're working a project and it fails miserably. And you gotta find ways to help fix it. And you're working long nights, you have no sleep, you're cranky, but you build a team, a bond with a group of people. And then a year or two later, you'll say, remember the time we worked on this? Like, oh yeah, kid. You'll laugh at it. During the time, it's horrible. But as Mike was saying, it's how you persevere afterwards. That's what makes them employees. So I've had those experiences. Those are fun.
In retrospect.
It's not fun going through.
But again, you're making me laugh over here because you reminded me of something. The way I moved into the institutional sales group, which is the group I've been a part of now for over 10 years, I'd been at the firm for 9.5 years, had been a manager, had a good amount of success. I got tapped with helping with the disaster recovery program.
I used to love that.
Yeah, I know you did. And you didn't tap me for it, but I didn't want to do it. And I spent meetings talking about bird flu and call lines and all this stuff. And when it came down to select someone to move into this small startup institutional sales group, a person I'd worked with but not closely with for a decade, and this got relayed to me afterwards, it was kind of like, well, Mike did a really good job with that disaster recovery thing. Yeah, let's give him a shot. Because it was a shift in careers. And to think back, and I had forgotten about that, and to think back that a disaster recovery program helped shape my career. So you never know. You never know. And it, you know.
To do that station.
And that was definitely one where it was fun in retrospect. It was not fun at the time.
We can sit around and do a avian flu experience,
Yep.
you know, like model to make sure what happens to the business.
Yeah, very important to the business, but you know.
Yeah, I got State Street because I got that job at State Street because of that job.
Yeah.
Because of that John Hancock.
So if you want to grow in your career, take on the business, the disaster recovery program, and you'll be a success.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Do you approach a client initially?
Yeah.
Who do you approach and what challenges do you face in particular?
So a couple. So right now,
Question? I don't think.
oh.
Yeah, what was the question?
when you approach a new client, what are the challenges you face? Is that fair? In another part of my career, I was doing a lot of cold calling where they didn't know who I was and why I was calling them. Being politely persistent is my best advice, where, you know, if I want to speak to you about something and I call you today, today's Friday, I don't call you again on Monday. But I call you a week from Monday, leave another polite voicemail. You know, a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, leave another voicemail. And eventually, you're getting through, these people are humans, and they say, geez, he's been really nice, let me call him back. And then trying to avoid, and this is from a sales perspective, again, trying to avoid what I want. You know, so that in a first meeting, it's going to be, you know, how long have you been at the firm? You know, talk to me about your business. Love to know what you do from a technical standpoint, but also from a 30,000-foot view standpoint. take a lot of notes, understand them, share a little bit about what we do, but really just make it about them, understand what they're doing before I start talking to them about all the wonderful things we can do. Challenges, I would say, getting in front of someone, and then being in front of someone, just being credible and being respectful of their time. Always being respectful of their time is incredibly important. That balance of where you want to be pleasantly persistent. So you're almost making them feeling guilty for not calling you back, as opposed to making them mad that you've called them again. So that would be my advice.
The wants,
Yes.
right? The wants and needs right there. Look for the wants and needs when you go for an interview. Or when you interview, when you network, what do you want? Oh, I can help you out with that. I know somebody. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? I can help you.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions back, you mentioned that in your resume it helps if you have a header. So what should the header have, like the position that you're applying for at the company and the company that you're applying for? Is that a good practice?
I think, what I've seen can be effective is kind of talking about, what you're seeking, the type of role you're seeking, and a couple things in that brief write-up. Make it, you're seeking a company with, or a long-term position at a company that has these attributes, where you can add value to that organization in these ways. What I would say is, if you do that, just make sure you're kind of looking at it again before you send it out to each place. And I understand it's probably different if you're posting it, right? If you're posting it, I guess you want more of a general, you want to keep it general. But again, in that, try to articulate some of the value you can bring. And, again, trying to make it as much about them as possible. So.
Do you mean we should add a customized summary for?
Yeah, I think so. If you're directly applying to a company, I would. Or if you're directly sitting down, maybe you get that interview and you're bringing your resume with you. Maybe, along those lines. So that it's more, just so it's not conflicting with the company that you're applying at.
So
Yes.
what do you think about cover letters? I mean, some job description they specifically required for cover letter, and what kind of message that you want to send in a cover letter?
I'm a big believer, and again, and this is sort of going a little bit outside my realm of personal responsibility, but I'm a big believer in being brief and to the point, with the thought process that whether it's the HR person or the hiring manager, they're doing 100 different things, and they're going to be going through a lot of resumes. So being brief to the point would be my piece of advice. John, I don't know if you have some guidance on that. I haven't thought about a cover letter, quite frankly, in a long time.
Some companies want a cover letter, some people don't. It takes a long time to write a cover letter, but you got to relate it back to the job itself and how you can help out the company and why you're good. You should hire me because I can help you out here, here, here. We in the class we talked about the intro. Hi, I'm writing to you to express interest in this job. I feel I'm a good fit. I can help you out. The middle paragraphs are about how you'd be good at that position based on what the company job description is. Look at the company itself. I like to look at their mottos.
Yeah.
GE, we bring good things to life. What's John? I forget what Hancock's motto is, but if you can relate that somehow, I believe what's your passion about. I believe in the company. I believe in what they do. I want to be like if you're into Excel Hybrids as a company we're trying to find a position for, they're doing electric cars. I believe in hybrid vehicles because I believe in getting rid of gas-guzzling machines and trying to help the environment. I'm going to be part of this industry. And by the way, I can help you out with another experience or related back to the job description. Don't do a general one. Cover letters take a long time to write. If you have 10 jobs, write 2 or 3 cover letters. Do a real good job. The other for your top 2 or 3. The rest don't write it because it'll take you a long time to write. Yep. If you do a good job. Now you could just copy and paste, then you're not going to get it.
Right.
But if you do a real good job of related, you got to do some research. So my suggestions for cover letters are: if you have 10 companies, pick 2 or 3 that you really want and write cover letters for them. From a timing perspective, I'm not worried about the rest.
Yeah, and some of you just made me think of when I was doing a lot of cold calling and prospecting, I would have sort of a core email, but I would customize it for each one, and I think that's the other thing with interviewing, and I'm sure you'd all do this because you all seem like very nice people. Be very polite and nice to everyone you interact with. I've seen people lose sales relationships because they weren't too nice to the person who answered the phone or the person who checked them in at the desk. Life's short. It's better to be nice to people. Usually works out. So that's the approach.
Let me ask you a question. You said you hired a lot of people.
Yep.
So what made some more successful than others? Do you remember? Did you ever have to fire anybody?
Yes.
And why? What was that?
Not a fun experience, but so I'm thinking of two individuals. Both were excellent interviewers. Both did a very good job. And it was more than two over the years, but the first one, quite honestly, didn't show up to work on time. He was always late. And he's late, this is like the first couple weeks of work, always late, showing up, so almost immediately you start kind of the process, because John Hancock, as a manager, had a lot more flexibility to fire someone in the first 60 days than you did after that. And I think that's somewhat common at a lot of companies. So it was the basics. Wasn't showing up on time, wasn't doing the day-to-day. The other, another one, I'll give you two more examples. One was an individual who absolutely blew everyone away in the interview. Absolutely blew everyone away. And this was an individual who had served in the military, doing some very high-end work, doing things that, as he relayed, I don't think any of us could have done or would have wanted to do. That individual just did not handle the job well, had a hard time kind of like doing the basics of the job, and really didn't take feedback, and that was when we decided to move him along. Another individual that is still at the company and has been very successful was in a sales role, and he was not a salesperson. And I say that not because he wasn't slick or didn't articulate well. He would miss sort of the key sales points, what's important to the client. He was a good, at the time he was a good kid. He worked hard, did the right things, he was smart. He actually ended up getting his CFA, which is a monster exam. And he's still at the company, but in a different role. And I think that's a lesson too, because it was something where, everyone liked him, he worked hard, he did the right things, he just wasn't good at the job he was in. So we found him a job that he was good in, and he's done quite well. So again, I think a lot of it is, and being able to take feedback. The other issues really also too are, some issues where people just had a lot of interpersonal problems with other employees, things like that. So.
You guys have any other questions?
Yes.
So I'm kind of in a similar situation as you. So I got a call and I have an interview on Tuesday. That's a financial advisor position.
Okay.
Which my background is engineering. That's nothing have to do with this.
Yeah.
I believe in myself that you can put me in any place. I believe that I will perform my best in that place, and the outcome will be great. But the thing is, will the real world be as what I imagine? Like, will I perform as what I think that I will perform in the real world or not?
That's a tough question. And actually, if you have a few minutes afterwards too, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it, because I probably know the firm that you're interviewing at, and I might be able to provide some guidance. I'd be happy to talk with you afterwards. That's a tough. It's a tough call. And I'll say so personally, I had two job offers. One was with John Hancock, one was with the Census Bureau, working in their library at the time. That was more my background. But I think had a lower career growth prospects. And I made the choice that I wanted to explore this new industry, very well-established firm in Boston, very well respected in the industry. I took a shot at it and it worked out well. But it was also a position that afforded me some stability around it. So I think you do the best. We should talk afterwards too, because I think, understanding the career path at that role is very important, you know, and what it can and can't lead to. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you all. I appreciate, like I said, I sincerely appreciate you guys taking time, and it was nice meeting many of you, and I wish you all success in the future.